This is a Russian platoon strongpoint, housing approximately 30 soldiers, all under the watchful eye of a drone. A fully combat-ready unit of Ukrainian infantry on APCs, supported by a T-72 tank, advanced to counter their assault. The tank opens fire. The infantry dismounts and immediately begins executing their combat mission. The tank continues delivering suppressive fire while advancing. Look closely. The infantry moves in perfect synchronization with the vehicle, advancing under its reliable protection. Meanwhile, the Russians are distracted by a Ukrainian reconnaissance drone, futilely attempting to shoot it down with rifle fire. A group of Ukrainian soldiers maneuvers from the opposite side of the tree line, attempting to encircle the Russians from multiple directions. The tank keeps advancing as one group maneuvers around the opposite side of the tree line, while another follows behind the vehicle, providing cover with small arms fire. Look at the intense firepower unleashed by the tank. The Russians in the trenches can't even lift their heads for a few seconds. The group has already moved in close to the Russian positions, bringing them under complete fire control and nearly encircling them. Another APC arrives to provide support. From here, the Ukrainian infantry takes over, firmly establishing control over this sector. This Ukrainian tank, operating without infantry support, embarked on a solo mission to deliver a powerful strike against Russian fortifications in this tree line. The tank spares no ammunition, delivering strike after strike. However, its shells are not unlimited, so it begins to retreat while continuing to bombard the Russian positions. Suddenly, the Russians deploy a drone, and unfortunately, it's not just one. The first strike does not cause critical damage, so the tank continues to retreat while maintaining fire. The drones continue striking the tank. It endures several more hits, but the reactive armor has already served its purpose and is unlikely to withstand further impacts from the RPG warheads carried by the drones. Realizing this, the crew decides to abandon the vehicle. Look closely. The tank is already smoking, and the final drone strike renders it completely immobile. If you look closely, hiding beneath this so-called anti-drone grille is an old Soviet T-72. This tank has significant vulnerabilities for its crew, making it far less effective in modern combat. This is precisely why Ukrainian forces are eagerly mastering and transitioning to Western models like the Abrams and Leopard. So, hit that like button if you want to see more support and Western technology for the Ukrainian military, and if you believe that delaying assistance harms not only Ukraine but democracy as a whole. A striking example is this Leopard tank. It charges onto the battlefield with precision, targeting enemy positions. Most importantly, after successfully completing its mission, the tank leaves the area intact and unscathed. Russian forces were amassing offensive potential, preparing for another attack. This activity was clearly recorded by a reconnaissance drone. A decision was made to act preemptively. Thick fog covered the area, preventing enemy infantry from noticing how a Ukrainian T-72 tank crept almost right up to their positions. By the time they realized what was happening, it was too late. The Ukrainian tank reached a position just 20 meters from the Russian lines and began obliterating them with powerful shots. Just look at these shots. Thanks to the high-quality drone camera, they resemble scenes straight out of a Hollywood movie. But sadly, this is no fiction. It's the harsh reality brought by the Russians who invaded foreign soil. The tank completes its mission and, returning to the fog from which it emerged, disappears from the battlefield. Two Ukrainian T-72 tanks advance to assault Russian positions. An IFV carrying infantry follows closely behind as part of the operation. A Russian soldier hears the rumble of machinery and rushes to the trenches to warn his group, which is holding the defensive line. Notice that the trench, about 10 meters long, is located right on the open terrain. The IFV stays behind as the two tanks pass through one grove and head toward another, where Russian forces are stationed. Enemy artillery opens fire. The tanks split up, take their positions, and open fire. Behind one of the tanks, an explosion is heard. If you look closely, you can spot a Russian soldier firing an anti-tank missile, but missing the target. This failed shot only infuriates the Ukrainian tank crew even more, and they begin advancing straight toward the trenches, continuing to fire intensively. The tank closes in, and its fire leaves the Russians no chance to counter. It moves as close as possible and continues to bombard the positions with shells. Just look at this relentless fire. Even the trees can't withstand it and fall like they've been chopped down. Eventually, the tank begins to run out of shells. At this point, the Russian soldiers might have sighed with relief, but unexpectedly, instead of retreating, the tank starts driving over the trench, burying it under its weight. Afterward, the tank retreats slightly, providing cover for the Ukrainian assault group that arrived on an IFV to complete the mission and solidify their hold on the positions. From the industrial zone of the factory under Russian control, a group of vehicles advances to assault Ukrainian positions. 4 lightly armored infantry vehicles spread out in a line and move into open terrain. Ukrainian artillery opens fire. But the shells land nearby, failing to inflict direct hits on the vehicles. Suddenly, the leading IFV sharply changes course, veering off the road onto an open field. This was a spontaneous and highly risky decision, as the field could have been mined. However, it appears this section was left unmined, catching the Ukrainian forces by surprise. The Russian vehicle was now almost at the Ukrainian positions. At the same time, a kamikaze drone is in pursuit of another IFV. Look at how close an artillery shell landed to it, just a near miss. Yet, the drone doesn't relent, relentlessly chasing the vehicle, which the Russians had fortified with additional defenses before the assault. Just before the strike, it's clear they even constructed a shield from wooden logs, hoping to bolster its protection. After the impact, the crew abandons the vehicle and hastily flees. The Russians retreat so quickly that they even forget to close the doors behind them, significantly simplifying the task for the next drone. Let's return to the first IFV, which has already deployed its troops. Ukrainian soldiers, taking a favorable position on higher ground, strike at the vehicle. Take a closer look. You can see one of the Ukrainian soldiers making a precise shot with an RPG. A group of about 10 soldiers hastily retreats to the nearest greenery. Meanwhile, abandoned equipment is finished off with precise drone strikes. This IFV didn't even manage to leave the industrial zone before being destroyed almost immediately. Another infantry fighting vehicle does manage to push forward. But notice, the infantry flees, realizing the assault has failed. Despite this, the driver stubbornly continues moving under artillery fire, retracing almost the exact route across the open field. The driver manages to reach the designated point, but upon seeing that the previous IFV has already been destroyed, decides to bypass it and keep moving. However, his advance is short-lived. The vehicle is promptly struck by a precise RPG shot from a Ukrainian soldier. Look at the open doors. The infantry had long since abandoned the IFV, scattering in all directions. Left alone, the panicked and disoriented driver continued moving forward. However, this only worsened his situation. Kamikaze drones began targeting the vehicle. The IFV sustained damage, thick smoke billowing from it. A series of precise explosive drops from the drones ultimately rendered the vehicle immobile. The driver fled and, in desperation, took shelter in a Ukrainian trench. Fortunately for him, he survived, and eventually, Ukrainian forces captured him as a prisoner. This video shows a successful attack by Ukrainian forces, during which they managed to capture Russian fortified positions. The Russians dug in these trenches but soon ran out of ammunition. The Ukrainian forces quickly decided to seize the opportunity to attack them. The Ukrainians used at least 3 Soviet-made tanks and 5 armored vehicles to transport infantry. Notice that there is only 1 tank on the Russian side, and it seems to be confused. Perhaps the Russians decided that they had no chance of repelling the attack of the superior Ukrainian forces and decided to retreat. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian tanks are suppressing the remnants of the resistance from the Russian fighters in the trenches. After this, the Ukrainian infantry began to disembark and approach the trenches. The Ukrainian soldiers bravely entered the enemy trenches and captured them without any losses. This place will now serve as a foothold for future Ukrainian attacks. But do you remember the Russian tank that was covering the Russian soldiers? The tank crew decided not to engage in the fight and quietly retreated. However, one of the Ukrainian tanks started to chasing it. It is not exactly clear how, but the Ukrainian tank somehow managed to get within about 20 meters of the Russian tank. Look, the 2 tanks are separated by just a narrow strip of trees. In this video, we see the Ukrainian tank firing point-blank at the Russian tank. Moments later, it fires again. It's interesting to see what happened to the Russian tank after being hit by 2 precise shots. Fortunately, we have footage from another drone that shows just how powerful those 2 shots were. Take a look. That was the first shot. And here comes another one. I'm absolutely certain that even though the tank didn't explode, it is completely destroyed and unfit for further use. The fate of the crew remains unknown. After completing its mission, the Ukrainian tank began to slowly retreat to avoid detection by Russian reconnaissance.